I first met Yang-May 2 years ago when we had both signed up to the same public speaking course, and we were both learning to speak like a TED talker. And that was the first time I had seen Yang-May speaking. And I remember thinking, goodness me, what does she need to be here for? She was extraordinary even then. But the journey that she has been on in those 2 years, as you can see from the performance tonight, has been even more extraordinary than that. She did, of course, also do a TEDx talk last year, which was really the starting point, I think, Yang-May, wasn't it, for this whole process. Yeah. So if you'd like to just tell us a little bit about the genesis of Bound Feet Blues.
Well, I had the idea and the title about 10 years ago, and it's such a good title. And I thought, I'm going to write this conventional memoir, because with a background as a novelist, that was my comfort zone. And I tried to write it, but it was just not getting any traction. So I put it away. And then having done a bit of public speaking, and I realized that actually these are stories based on oral stories, passed down by word of mouth. And so actually you have to tell it orally. So once I started to tell it, it came to life and the characters came to life. And so I started putting together the script in January.
So there was a key moment, wasn't there, Yang-May? I remember you telling me about the bare feet.
Yes. So I was at this workshop run by the Centre for Solo Performance, and we worked on the script. And I was just standing up in front of the workshop and just trying out the text. And they kept saying, but we keep looking at your feet. You're going to have to do something. How are you going to stage this? What are you going to do about the shoes? And so we talked about maybe I should get some stilettos and put them here, and some hiking boots, and then I could run around and put them on and all this sort of stuff. And then I just went home one evening in my dining room, and I took my shoes off, and suddenly it all happened. The little kids, the 8-year-old self, I just kind of started prancing around the dining room, and I thought, oh, okay. And so suddenly it all came together, because actually when you take the shoes away, bound feet and shoes become a metaphor. And of course the story is a metaphor, and it just underscores that.
Yes, fascinating. Yeah, that really came through in the performance, the different characters that you were playing, and that they all used their feet in a different way, they all moved in a different way. And of course, this brings me nicely on to when you first became involved with Jessica. So just if you could just explain a little bit about how Jessica became involved.
Okay. So as part of this workshop, I got the opportunity to do a scratch night. And up until then, I'd got used to having a mic for the TED Talk or a mic stand. And then I thought, you know what, I need to get away from this. And so I thought I better learn how to project my voice. And that's how I found Jessica.
Mm-hmm. So let's go over to Jessica now and see her side of it. So Jessica, so can you explain us a little bit about why you were so drawn to working with Yang-May on this project?
Yeah, so I worked with Yang-May on the voice work for the scratch performance. And I saw it, and it was pretty amazing. And soon after, because she was invited by the Southeast Asian Arts Festival to develop the play to a complete piece, and she asked me to direct it for her, because we'd already started getting on very well. And there were one or two things that really drew me into the piece. One, obviously, the subject matter, the foot binding, but also the stories of coming out, which certainly foot binding, certainly in my lifetime, I haven't seen a show in London or in Britain in foot binding, though I'm sure some company has. And also in the coming out stories, I thought the angles that were being taken were very unusual. So the subject matter was unusual. I loved the bicultural, the East-West that was represented, and I'm a sucker for bicultural stuff, so that really appealed to me. But also the sort of rhythm of the piece, because Yang-May came from a background of writing novels, the scenes, they're actually written like chapters. And I think that's a very strong element in sort of how you take that onto the stage and how that informs the stage piece, which again, it's very unusual. So I was tempted because all those elements kind of stretched me really took me into a place that I hadn't been before.
A
Fascinating.
new frontier.
A new frontier, indeed. So, Yang-May, so when you started working with Jessica, I remember you telling me that you learnt so much about stagecraft and performance. What was that process like for you?
It was really, really fascinating because as a novelist, you write your thing, you send it off. It's up to the reader to interpret it, nothing more to do with you. And suddenly I'm finding I've got to interpret my text. Jessica has just been amazing in kind of understanding what I wrote. And she said, "Oh, what do you mean here?" "I don't know." So just by kind of talking through the motivation and to bring out the really deep textures and emotions of the piece. And the thing that in visual and stage performance, everything has to be different. If you've done one thing, you can't repeat it because then it becomes visually and vocally repetitive. But in terms of each phrase that comes through, every step is an agony. Each time I say it, it has a different meaning, and it has to fit in with that particular scene. And so, what I found with your work with me was just to kind of tease out all that subtle, delicate stuff. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
So, Jessica, can you tell us a little bit about how you drew this out of Yang-May? How did you help us create the different characters? That's what I found fascinating.
Well, I mean, what Yang-May perhaps was lacking in theatre experience was balanced with the fact that, well, you wrote the piece. So if we got lost, I would go, well, what did you want from that piece? And she would explain, and then we could get to it. But the characters, I mean, they're in two camps, if you like. I mean, the characters that Yang-May knows, all her relatives, they were kind of easy to bring out because they're part of Yang-May's life. The difficult ones were the ones that we hadn't met, which the archetypal mother who does the foot binding, that was one of our hardest ones to find, and the great-grandmother. And through those, particularly May, the mother, we went into the old theatre hot seating where, to help develop a character, I would ask Yang-May questions of her as that character and find the character that way. And
Fascinating, interesting. So, Yang-May, there are many themes in the piece. There are particular repeated themes about endurance and submission and ultimately liberation. What for you was the absolute core theme of this piece?
I think that this idea that foot binding is not just a physical act that took 10 years, but on the foot, but it's a psychological crushing of the girl's spirit. And the perfect exemplary woman was one who was obedient and submissive and endured, and that was a whole culture dedicated to creating this kind of woman. And I think how lucky I am to be born in this time, to be living in the West. We have this little window of opportunity as women in the West to be who we want to be. And even so, the shadows are encroaching. And it was just the fragility of what we have and how I value that, to think that if I had been born at a different time, that would be me with my crushed feet.
Yeah, that's an extraordinary thought, isn't it? A thousand years of history, and yet you were born now, and you escaped that. I think that one of I'm sure the audience will be asking questions about this, but the research that must have gone into finding out the detail about the foot binding so that you could portray that, it was so compelling. And the foot, I mean, it was. How did you feel when you found out all that detail in terms of how did you feel about your great-grandmother when you found that out?
Well, my first reaction when I read these academic papers was I just wanted to throw up. It was just so violent and awful. And then when I thought about my great-grandmother and all those women, for 40 generations, that's from the time of William the Conqueror to about 1940s. How many millions of women had that happen? It's just appalling.
It is extraordinary, isn't it? I think it's probably a good time to open up to the audience now. So, who would like to ask a question of either Yang-May or Jessica?
Can I just ask on that historical note, when did bookbinding stop and how did and why did it stop?
I believe it was the last women who had their feet bound was 1940s or 50s, but it sort of started a bit earlier because of the Mao era. And the idea in the 1920s that, modernization, women, everybody wants to be modern, but it took a while to filter through to the rural areas.
But it was banned before the 1920s. Do we have a date? Wasn't it earlier than that?
The first time it was forbidden, it was in 1911.
1911.
Yeah.
Okay.
With Sun Yat-sen.
Yeah.
Sun Yat-sen.
Yeah, and actually, an emperor did try to ban it, I think, around the 1600s, but the people just ignored him. But it's actually tied up to do with nationalism, and there's economic, sociological, all kinds of interesting reasons why foot binding just carried on.
Okay, another question from the audience? If I can see it, okay, over here.
Thanks for a great performance. An interesting themes that I thought came out of the relationship between happiness and the ability to endure pain. You thought that the ability to endure pain was a useful measure of how happy you are.
I'm not very good with pain, and so I think that it's about being able to be yourself and who you want to be, and if you're made to be somebody that you're not, and you have to endure it, that leads to nervous breakdowns, all kinds of stuff at the psychological level. And there is an idea around, in Chinese culture, around endurance, and the whole thing about these beautiful women who endure pain. And in the Chinese literature, there is this sense of these men who are kind of, oh, she's so beautiful, but I know she's enduring pain. And I think it's interesting that the face of ecstasy is quite similar to the face of agony.
Very interesting question, though, that one. Any other questions down here? Oh, yes, lady at the back with the red scarf.
Yang-May, I wanted to ask you about the difference between living your life here in the West to what you could imagine it being had you stayed where you were brought up.
I needed to live here in the West. When I came to school here, I was all, John Steed, Emma Peel, all that. I was drawn to this, the swinging 60s of London, and that idea of this liberal, intellectually liberal as well as morally liberal, I suppose. And I guess I always knew I was gay, deep, deep, deep down inside. And I knew that I would have no life if I lived in a culture where that was not accepted. And I really value my life that I have been able to have here, with my friends, with work, and being able to be out at work, and being out now, and it's fantastic.
What is extraordinary is your parents accepting some of this.
I think it's the two scenes, the two mothers. The first mother was doing everything she could for her daughter's happiness, which was about binding, making her fit in, because she wanted her to have a good life. My mother, in contrast, she had to give up this idea that she would be the grandmother of a conventional family, that I would marry and have, a nice husband who is a banker or whatever, and have children, and just carry on that tradition. But that is an unbinding. And so, the mothers in this room, I think, will appreciate that, that choice. It's very difficult. How do you make the right choice? And I'm very grateful to my mother and my whole family for allowing me to blossom.
Well, there you are. So, Okay, it's quite hard to see everybody, but over here, yes.
Slight tangent. There's a parallel here with the controversy that's raging at the moment about female genital mutilation.
Yeah.
Unless this is kind of the next chapter. Anyway, the story, isn't it, of women being released from all sorts of bindings and impressions. I'm not even sure that's a question, rather than a statement.
Yes.
More an observation.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
And just to add to that, I just thought the moment where you talked about in the West how people cut and break and through cosmetic surgery, I thought that was very smart, because there's a danger with a show like this that it could be received by a Western audience as, oh well, those foreigners, those Chinese, that's how they behave.
Yes.
And actually, it was wonderful you brought that really early in the show to show that actually these are all different cultural expressions of beauty, and that universality of high heels, sort of binding, feet binding, and ballet. It's a kind of universal thing, really, of patriarchy. So,
Yes.
that's very well done.
Yes. Thank you for noting it. That was my intention.
Yeah, and good, because that's important, I think, because there is so little East Asian work in the UK.
Yes. Yes.
When it's received by a Western audience, one has to, be wary of how it's received.
Yes.
So,
Yes. And I think that there is a danger of being the exoticization. It's a double-edged sword, and I am a little bit concerned that I don't want to be the bound foot writer or the bound foot performer. And Chinese must be all about bound feet now. So, and also bound feet, because it's a little bit removed from female genital mutilation in that it's a defunct practice. It's a little bit easier to talk about it without the high feelings. And you can actually use it as a mirror, as you've pointed out, kind of, well, actually, you can look over there, but if somebody came from Mars and looked at us, how weird would we be?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
But also there's the thing, at a distance in the West, I mean, I certainly fell into this, we know about bound feet, but we know they've got nice shoes, and of course you don't think about the implications of how that was achieved. And I think a lot of people, we had a couple of run-throughs, the graphic nature, and then you think, well, of course, that had to happen, all the cutting, and that's a kind of surprise.
And I actually left out
how
some of the
violent
worst
it was.
bits.
Did you really?
Yeah.
So it was even more graphic
Yes.
and violent than
Shall
that.
I expand? Okay, get your sick bag out. They would bind it, and then the foot would rot, and they would take away the rotten flesh. And the idea was not to make it was to make it short but also narrow. And so they would break it not this way, but also this way. And part of the rotten smell was part of its attraction. And so you would get fragrant lotuses, and men would start to categorize different kinds of lotus, and there would be different names of the different types of lotus. And also, if it was unbound, as you could see, if you had a slice through here, it would look like a vagina. And so that was also quite interesting for men to put things in. And this shape is sort of phallic. And so they would quite like that being put in interesting places. So, there was a whole fetishization. And of course that would happen over 1,000 years. It just became more and more intense.
My goodness, that is extraordinary. Well, we still have we still have a lot of foot fetishism around today.
Presumably some kids would get gangrene and
Yep.
die.
Yeah.
So I've got two questions really. One is about the structure of the play that you wrote, and just thinking about what for you would be the key pivotal scene in the play, and also about your plans for future staging in terms of
Good question.
what you want to do, in terms of images and staging and lighting.
I guess the one sentence that is the most important is I matter. As women, we matter in a world that is run by men. and that men now, the internet trolls, all try and make us shut up. The world has been run from one perspective. You don't matter, but we do. And in terms of the staging and future production?
Well, we're hoping next year to have a full production. Obviously, the emphasis of the piece is on Yang-May's performance and all her transformations, so that's very central. So we want to be careful kind of what we do in terms of set and lighting, that it doesn't draw away from that. I think we're keen to have quite a simple set dressing, but maximise a lighting. We see it very much done with really good lighting scheme to work from scene to scene, lighting that can evoke place and time. We see that going that way. And also to leave Yang-May free with the piece, because we can see it being used in lots of situations at seminars and workshops where she could just take a couple of scenes. She's already done this. So having a full production that can work, but that actually can be quite flexible as well in just using bits and pieces in different setups.
And I think it's been an interesting experience doing it on this set, and I don't know what your experience of it as an audience, but because because we're doing it on top of somebody else's set, and when we first saw the set design, I was like, oh my God! But actually, I mean, this play is the play that's on here. It's set in the First World War, and so actually, if you think about it, the very brutalist feel of the set fits with the theme, because when you think about Bound Feet, you think, oh, pretty slippers, embroidery and whatever, but actually the starkness, I think, brings out a certain aspect of the story.
And also the layers, I forgot I'm not throwing. Also the layers work really well, the different spaces.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, we were horrified when we first saw the set, because, we'd practiced it on the flat. But actually, it worked to our advantage.
It worked really well,
the
yes.
elevation,
Yeah,
yes.
especially the hiking.
Yeah, going up the mountain.
I'm glad you like that scene. It's a difficult scene.
Yes, just here.
But what about the ending? So did you start with that end in mind?
No, I started with the Red Cheong Sam. For some reason, it's kind of like iconic in my memory, and in my novel, The Flame Tree, it also opens with the heroine in a Red Cheong Sam, which I'd forgotten about, but I looked at it the other day. And of course, there's this kind of very sedate, sexy walking. And I wanted to contrast it. And in the first half, all the adult women are very, very still, and it's only the child that runs around. And at the end of the first half, even the child is bound. And then in the second half, I wanted to open it out. So, and I love hiking with Angie and my pals, Mariana and Louise. We went, and Gerald the dog, we went hiking on the South Downs Way, and I thought, that's a really good place to end it, because it's open and it's, vigorous running, and that contrasts. And the structure is that in each half there is a counterbalancing scene, more or less.
We've got probably 5 more minutes, have we?
minutes, yes.
So if we've got more questions, yes, don't you?
This is an unfair question because you've got plenty here for us to chew on, but I just kept thinking, wow, you've put everything into this. You haven't held anything back. And I know you have lots more writing in you. Are there other performances in you that are starting to come to? I mean, are there other shows percolating, or is this the big one? You know what I mean. I mean, it's like after that, what could you possibly?
I don't know, because at the moment my whole life is Bound Feet at the
Yeah.
moment. I am going to write a book called Bound Feet Blues: The Stories Behind the Story, because you may be thinking, I mean, you may not be thinking, you left great-grandma on the boat.
Yes, she's on the junk. What happened?
That's my very clever plan to get you to buy the book.
Yes.
Because I couldn't actually fit it in. The original script was way too long, and so I had to cut all that. And it's only 25 pages. My novels are 450 pages. So the book will have all the stories that I couldn't fit in, and will build on that. So.
I'm curious, how did you work on the embodying different characters you presented? Because they were so excellently played, and
Thank you.
your body gave out the essence of the character in such depth.
I'll give you my perspective and then I'll hand over to Jess as the eagle-eyed director. I guess I would tell stories, the iconic story of my mother telling us how she and Dad met. I just kind of played her for laughs. I imagined playing her to her. And she did watch the video of the scratch night and she laughed her head off. And so, and then with the 8-year-old and sort of 10-year-old self, I just kind of allowed myself to think, well, what was it like when I was 8 years old? And, you know, playing Bruce Lee, that was such fun. How come when you're grown-ups you can't go, yeah, you know? You have to be all very sedate. So that was fun. And then the other characters were a bit more difficult. So.
Well, as I said earlier, the characters that Yang-May knows, in fact, were already embodied in her, and she was living them as part of her heritage. And that the harder ones were the ones that we didn't know. And, you know, there you need to discuss who they are, how they feel, how old they are, and, you know, build a picture, their attitude, and they say by this hot seating, you know, try and extract all those things so that then you become them and walk around. The hardest thing we had was with the characters whose feet were bound, and discussions we had about should we show somebody walking with bound feet, because of course it would be impossible for us to accurately do that. There's no way that we could do that, and we did have a moment that we had to throw out because of the platforms. But we talked about, and Yang-May experimented with that, because obviously that informs going through that, and having the bound feet is a vital element in forming the character, and particularly that of the mother who binds the feet, trying to find that character and trying to understand, you know, what would motivate a mother to do that to their daughter, and the whole cultural circumstances that could make that happen, and be believable when she's saying, but I got a good life, you know, and you know, that was a very big investigation for us.
So it was really, I think, it's just starting from the emotion and the psychology of it. And the hot seating was really, just to give a bit more kind of explanation, is that I would sit as the mother. We gave her a name, called her May, because most Chinese women, girls are called May because it means beauty. And Jess would ask me questions about my life, and I would just make it up. And it was really, really interesting because it kind of got me to understand her. Of course, she's me, but also just then, and I found myself sitting upright and feeling very superior to everybody, and that kind of thing. So,
wow. So we're running out of time now, unfortunately. So it's just time for one more question over here.
Thank you for the performance, Yang-May. Very, very glad that it's part of the aspect this year. Very glad that to see how it's blossomed. Speaking as someone who grew up in Southeast Asia and possibly very different, slightly different experiences. The stories of the coming out experiences, the repression, the foot binding are not as curious to me as the fact that there is a lot of sharing in your family amongst the women, which is something that I don't think a lot of Southeast Asian women can say of their families, because we're quite reticent within families, and I think that there's something very powerful about seeing someone put their life story on stage for everyone, and I think that can encourage people to share their own stories.
Absolutely.
So I would actually say, please consider bringing it on world tour.
Where?
Everyone in the UK would probably be very used to being very open about sharing their life stories, because that's liberating personally.
okay.
But like the power of, there is a transformational power of theatre or oral storytelling that makes people how they met.
Yeah.
And ask about their great-grandparents and grandparents who, like yours, went down from China in a junk boat and stuff like that, which we still don't know, so,
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk.
Yes. Very good point. Very
Thank
good
you.
point. Thank you. Thank you very much to everybody for all your excellent questions. So I just want to thank all of you, and I want to thank Yang-May and Jessica. Thank you very much.